Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and here is my review of Monster Hunter World. As a newcomer, I'm a noob at Monster Hunter. This review is not sponsored. I bought the game because I enjoyed the beta quite a lot. I've put a little over 70 hours into the game at time of writing, and the game's been out at time of writing for about a week. And I think that's enough to form an initial opinion. I may have to do another review for this game in about a year's time for the PC version once we've had a bunch of DLC additions to the game, but here's my review of the launch experience. And now, just to get this out of the way, the majority of the audience on my channel comes from Dark Souls, so if I'm making comparisons to Dark Souls, it's because people will understand those comparisons. And if you don't know what Monster Hunter is, fortunately the name gives it away. The goal in Monster Hunter is to hunt monsters, either by killing or capturing them, harvesting their parts to create armor and weapons for your character. The premise of the story is that, well, you create a hunter, and that you are part of a fleet that has sailed to the New World to figure out why elder dragons make the passage there every 10 years. The story is light in Monster Hunter, but the supporting cast is fun enough, specifically made up of the Handler, your talkative female sidekick who will handle your missions, and your cat companion that you create along with your player character that will assist you in fighting monsters and traversing the world. There are a bunch of other characters too who remain in the hub, supporting you in less direct ways. So how does the basic gameplay go? Monster Hunter World is split up into 5 zones or levels, each of which is a sort of mini open world environ on its own. You can freely explore them in an expedition to hunt and gather as you wish, or embark on missions which have time limits, and if you are KO'd too many times, usually 3, the mission fails. As for the missions, they are divided into several categories: main assignments that progress the story, optional ones that may unlock useful items, and investigations, which are effectively side quests with better rewards in case you're after a specific monster's materials, and you will get hundreds of investigations of various kinds. For example, if you've tracked Anjanath and you're picking up the trail, you might unlock an investigation for Anjanath, same for breaking Anjanath's parts or killing Anjanath. Essentially, if you just play the game normally, you will unlock plenty of investigations. A basic hunting mission will go somewhat like this, however. Once you accept the quest, you have the chance to prepare in the hub area. You can eat meals, not meat eels, that increase your stats, and that is highly suggested before a mission. You can also check out the monster's weakness and stats in your guide, if you've researched it enough, that is. Once you enter the area, you have to find the monster. For the most part, they seem to have areas they prefer, routes they will patrol, lairs they will rest in and retreat to, and so forth. To aid you in tracking them, your character is equipped with scout flies. Effectively, you will find tracks of your mark in the world, footprints, feathers, scales, and so forth. Touching these will let your scout flies track the monster's scent. Think of them as your own hunting dogs that happen to look like very useful video game waypoint markers, leading you to where you need to go. Once you find the monster, you simply need to destroy it. You can break parts, sever tails, and so forth. Once you've inflicted enough damage, the monster will waddle off, escaping back to its lair to rest. At this point, you usually have the decision to trap the monster and take it alive, or kill it and carve it up. Monsters have no health bars per se in Monster Hunter, so you'll have to rely more on visual cues for the most part. The actual combat is really interesting in Monster Hunter. I would call it a Marmite situation. It's love it or hate it. Movements are not exactly slow or clunky, but very deliberate, with a certain learning curve. Now, I know this might seem like an odd comparison, but it really reminds me of another MT Framework game, Resident Evil 5. Many people hate the controls in Resident Evil 5, and 4 for that matter, but there's nothing actually objectively bad about them. People say, oh, it's slow, it's clunky, it's not responsive, but It is. If you press a button, immediately the game will respond to what you told it to do. It's just that this control scheme is different to the norm. If you try and play Resident Evil 5 like it's Gears of War, you're going to not enjoy it because it isn't Gears of War. And even though like every other third-person shooter plays like Gears of War, this doesn't, so you can't expect it to, and you can't play it in that way. So whilst the controls and movement might seem a bit unusual, there's nothing actually bad about it. They are just somewhat unique and take a bit of getting used to. You have a health meter and a stamina meter, and stamina is used up by sprinting, rolling and blocking, but not attacking, with a few exceptions, like a few special attacks might use your stamina. There is no hard lock-on like in Dark Souls or Zelda, only a camera focus. You will have to manually aim your attacks for the most part. That means you have to position your character so they are facing the enemy, not so that the camera is facing the enemy. As for weapons, there's a very interesting variety. There's, let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Sword and shield, great sword. Long sword, which is sort of a Nodachi style katana. Charge blade, switch axe, insect glaive, heavy and light bow guns, bow, lance, gun lance, hammer, hunting horn, and jewel blades. I think that's all of them. Does that seem like a lot of weapons to you, or not many? Now this might just be me, but I played the entire game up to this point using one single weapon, the gun lance. I've used the heavy bowgun in like 3 missions because I really like how it looks. It's like a giant cannon. This isn't, say, like Dark Souls, where most weapon types aren't all that different. The difference between a long sword, a short sword, and a katana in Dark Souls is very small at the end of the day. Each weapon in Monster Hunter vastly changes your playstyle and your approach to the game. Even the differences between lance and gun lance are actually a lot bigger than you might think. There is a lot to learn about your chosen weapon. I mean, I've been playing with the gun lance for over 70 hours and I still feel like I haven't mastered it or anything like that. I feel like I'm getting the hang of it. Every few hours or so it feels like I'm learning something new, a better way to use this weapon. Because every weapon has some depth and learning curve to it, and with each weapon there are different trees that you can upgrade them down. For example, let's say you start off with a basic gun lance. You have an iron gun lance and a bone gun lance, and then those are the 2 trees that then expand into more trees, such as a fire gun lance, a water gun lance, a gun lance that has the poison element to it, and then you can upgrade each of these elements to make them stronger. So if you go down the fire gun lance tree, you will start with a fire gun lance and then go fire gun lance 2, 3, and then make an ultimate one, essentially. Fortunately, the game gives you a training area and all of the basic weapons so you can try them out at your leisure until you find one that has that initial click that feels right to you. Is there a best weapon? No doubt there is, but I don't think there's any bad weapons. Maybe the charge blade has the highest DPS in perfectly optimal situations, but that doesn't mean other weapons are bad. The hunting horn is definitely more of a group weapon, so you might not enjoy it so much if you're playing by yourself, but you can still use it by yourself and you won't be crippled. If you're like me, you might find yourself more grateful to run into a player using a hunting horn than, say, a longsword or dual blades. But then who doesn't want to run into a hunting horn user who's going to toot and give you loads of buffs? But really, at the end of the day, I don't see any weapon type and go, oh no, not one of those. But so far as I understand, some weapons do have a bit of a stigma attached to them. Like in prior games it was the longsword, which was a very popular weapon because it's a giant katana and it does look cool. And it's so long that people would be knocking their teammates all over the place with it. On top of weapons though, armour in Monster Hunter comes with skills, such as increasing the amount of critical damage you do, or your resistance to certain ailments and so forth. For example, let's say you craft the dinosaur helmet, and it will have a skill attached to it called like Critical Burster, and it will increase the damage of your critical attacks. This means that crafting armour is crucial to your progress, especially later on in the game. You will be crafting armour, weapons and consumables. Fortunately, this is relatively painless for the most part, although you're almost certainly going to start cursing a monster when they don't drop their damn gems. And we'll talk more about the armour skills thing a bit later on, as that's got an important nitpick for me. Now, I have briefly played another Monster Hunter on the 3DS, and there's been a few quality of life improvements since then. For example, the nets you use to capture small bugs, the mining picks and whetstones, all of these things are now infinite use, instead of requiring you to repair and manage them, which I think is a great change. I don't want to have to worry about bringing a bunch of pickaxes or nets. They should just be there, and now they are. You're also equipped with a slinger now, which is a new wrist-mounted device you can use as a grappling hook and to shoot out various small projectiles. Dung to fend off unwanted monsters intruding on your hunt. Flash pods to stun enemies, great for people who are flying around. And when I say people, I mean monsters. When monsters are flying around and you want them to get down on the floor so you can bash them on the head, hit them with a flash pod. And then you can find pods around the world, like plants, or sometimes they drop from enemies. Don't underestimate them because they're really useful. One big feature of Monster Hunter we've not spoken about yet, the online. Hunting by yourself is fun, but the game really comes alive when you're hunting with friends. There can be 4 in one hunt. And if there are 3 or more players, then your cat companions will leave. When you start the game up, you will be prompted to join an online session. If you remember my talk about lobbies last week in my Fighters review, this is similar. Monster Hunter also has squads, which are effectively clans. You can join several of these, and when you start the game, you can join your squad's session. And yes, you can opt to not join an online session at all and remain offline. Once you're in a session, anytime you post a quest, other players will be notified and can join if they are in your session. There's another way to get players in your actual mission or game too. During a mission, once you've entered the map, the game world, you can fire a flare at like almost any time, and this will open the mission up for anyone to join in and help you. I'm not entirely sure how the scaling works, but I believe when another player joins, the monster gains health, damage and so forth. I don't think it gets more for a 3rd or 4th player, but I honestly do not know for certain. You can also remove people from your session if they are, for example, being AFK and just trying to leech the rewards. So far that's only happened to me once, which I'm quite grateful for. So, how long is Monster Hunter World? I would say roughly 50 hours for the story, and with some additional content beyond that. Capcom are promising additional monsters as free DLC, so we'll see how that turns out. Incidentally, I was playing on PS4 Pro, but plan on probably picking up the PC version later down the line. So let's talk about performance and some things that could be improved. As it happens, performance could be improved. The Xbox One X and PS4 Pro come with 3 modes: graphics, resolution, and frame rate. And the frame rate isn't very good in any of these modes. That is to say, it is wildly inconsistent. Now, I never noticed any very low frame rates, but the inconsistency was definitely rearing its head now and then. I never had a problem with the frame rate when I was actually playing, but that's more saying how fun the game is. To draw a comparison with Dark Souls, the first game in that series had atrocious FPS issues, but it didn't mean the game wasn't amazing. Thankfully, World's framerate never reached Blighttown levels. I didn't have any other issues with the game's visuals, unless we're talking about the HUD, the interface. I found the game's interface too small. Maybe that's just how far I was sitting from my TV, or the size of my TV in general, as it's not very big, but it is becoming an issue for me in games these days. Not every game, but there are some games where I feel like they are either designed for you to be sitting like 2 foot away from the screen, or to be playing on an absolutely enormous TV. And I did notice after playing so much Monster Hunter, I did have some eye strain issues, shall we say. But this is definitely going to vary for everyone. But if you notice that some modern games, you feel like the UI is too small, you might have an issue with that in Monster Hunter. And there's no options to scale it, so that's another reason I'm looking forward to the PC version, as I sit a lot closer to my PC than I do my TV. The game's online and general menu functionality can be a little obscure, not user and beginner friendly, shall we say? It takes a bit of getting used to. One of my friends didn't really like that the hub effectively forces you to move around a 3D space when all of that could be done with menus. For example, why did we have to run from the blacksmith to the chef when that could have just been a menu? You could compare with Warframe, of all games. See, in Warframe, you can manually walk over to each station in your ship, or you can use the menu, which will just kind of teleport you there. Maybe that is something that would benefit Monster Hunter World. Fortunately, my biggest problems with the game could, in theory, be patched, so I'll go into this now. First up, monster variety. Although it's called Monster Hunter, the game feels more like Wyvern Hunter to me. The vast majority of enemies are dragons, dinosaurs, or wyverns, and whilst that's fine, I just wish there was a bit more variety. How about some giant spiders, snakes, crabs, primates, insects, and so forth? I'm really hoping that comes with the DLC, because whilst there's a decent amount of enemies, a lot of them can really be described in a very similar way. If you're trying to explain to someone visually the differences between Raytheon, Rathalos, Diablos, Legiana, in a nutshell, they are very similar enemies, and I just want something beyond dinosaurs and wyverns. But, you know, that's just me. It's not a huge problem. I didn't, hate the game because of it. If it was called Dog Hunter, there are loads of different types of dogs, and some dogs look really different to other dogs, but at the same time, they're still all dogs, whereas some cats or birds. That's a really weird tangent I went on, but I hope it makes sense. Second of all, remember when we were speaking about skills earlier? Yeah, the game really needs to fix the armor situation. What do I mean? Visuals. If you want an effective armor setup, that will quite often involve mixing and matching between different sets so that you can get the skills that you want. And you're going to end up looking like a complete clown in the process. The game includes the ability to change the colour of your armour, but before you get excited, keep in mind this usually ends up changing a tiny portion of the armour in question. For example, let's say you're wearing jeans and a belt. This is going to not let you change the colour of the jeans, but the colour of the belt. So if you've got bright pink jeans, well, too bad for you. So you're quite often going to be wearing armour that is not only mismatched visually, but the colours don't even match, which kind of boggles my mind. There are two main ways around this. First up, let us forge the skills and put them in any armour we want. For example, if we make the dinosaur helmet which has critical burst on it, let us then take critical burst and put it on the happy helmet instead of the dinosaur helmet. Alternatively, just let us transmog or glamour armour into others. Let us change the dinosaur helmet visually into the happy helmet whilst keeping the same stats and skills. This already exists in some form in the game. It has layered armour. The collector's edition came with a visual armour that you can layer on top of others. but that's like the only one in the whole game. I've heard a few people say that's just part of the game. I don't see any negative drawbacks to letting us wear what we want to wear. Looking stupid shouldn't be an intended part of the game. That's dumb, and if you want to remain looking stupid, just don't glamour your items, surely. For that matter, why can't we dye armor properly and change the colors on all the parts of the armor to what we want instead of changing one tiny bit? Fashion is very important, and it's not like this would be forced on people. The option doesn't hurt in any way that I can see. The best arguments against glamours and transmogs are, let's say you're playing a PvP game. Let's say you're playing Dark Souls and you walk across someone wearing Havel's armor. You know if they are wearing Havel's armor and fast rolling, you can do the maths in your head and you know they have X amount of endurance and you know they're going to have X amount of poise. If you come across someone who's wearing Havel's but they've transmogged it into like the cleric set, then you don't know what you're gonna be up against, you know? So in a PvP situation, in an MMO with PvP, in Dark Souls, in games like that, I totally understand why transmogging and glamours can be an issue, but in Monster Hunter, no. There is no issues that will stem from this. At the end of the day, you can just inspect someone and see what skills they have equipped if you really need to. Why do we have to choose between looking good and having the skills we want? Why not both? Right now, that is my number one want for Monster Hunter World, which is kind of a good thing because it lets you know how good the game is, if that's the main thing I want them to change, which can easily be patched in. Aside from that, the game has a few wonky hitboxes that could use adjusting, but thankfully I can count the number of times that happened, wonky hitboxes, on one hand. Most of the monsters are relatively fun to fight, but there's at least one or two that give me conniptions the first time I fought them, Anjanath and the Red Dog, namely. I think everyone is going to have one or two monsters that they don't really like fighting, but it's going to be subjective in a lot of cases because weapons might work better against one enemy than another. For example, if you're using the hammer on Diablos, you might be breaking his parts off constantly, whereas if you're using, I don't know, the dual blades, you might be going, oh, this is so hard compared to another boss. I think the game is largely balanced rather well, but if you're going into this looking for an ultra hard game, I wouldn't really say that's what you're going to get. You can obviously make the game harder by not upgrading your weapons, not eating, going in by yourself and leaving your cat at home, but this isn't some ultra difficult game. It offers a fair challenge, but nothing unreasonable. Now once you beat the game, you start fighting the tempered monsters, which are, more of a challenge, but again, it's not ultra difficult, it's fair. But again, that will come down to player skill. I personally never got stuck in Monster Hunter, but there are probably people who are going to be stuck on a certain monster for a while until they get the hang of it. But if you do consider yourself a high skill gamer who really wants only the hardest games that will push you to the limits, I don't think you're going to get that from Monster Hunter unless you set yourself artificial difficulty challenges, like never upgrading your weapons, for example. Finally, let's talk about the game's visuals and music. Nothing much to say about the music, to be honest. It wasn't, bad music, but nothing noteworthy. There were no themes that I found myself humming afterwards. No themes that got stuck in my head. As for visuals, I love the game's visual style. It's colourful and bright with interesting designs, and a lot of it's just insanely cute or insanely cool. I will say not too many of the armors are to my liking because they are so boisterous in design, but there's some that I like. Everyone is going to have their own sense of style and what appeals to them. For example, some people are going to love the armors in World of Warcraft where everything is huge and over the top, or then you have Final Fantasy XIV, which has a slightly more understated and elegant sort of style. Monster Hunter's armors, for the most part, are very big and over the top, which is nothing wrong with that, but it's just not my personal preference. But overall, I just love the game's visual style. I love how the food is like massive. One man eats a meal that could feed an entire village, and the cats are just my favourite thing ever, to be honest. Now, this isn't an issue with the visuals, but more the presentation. The game's contrast is all wrong. What you're looking at in this video is more or less how the game looks normally, but if I adjust the contrast just a little bit, doesn't this look a lot better? By default, the game's colours are somewhat washed out and dull. I don't understand why. When the PC version comes out, I imagine people will release, reshades that improve the game's visuals no end via very small tweaks. And the PC version is going to look amazing, I just know it. I'm looking forwards to playing at a consistent frame rate. The game's animations are absolutely beautiful, so it can be a shame when they are hampered by frame rate. Enemies in the distance in particular are animated at extremely low frame rates, which looks absurd and is an immersion breaker. But the PC version, running at a higher resolution is nice too, but it's going to be an amazing looking game, purely from its visual style. But let's wrap this up. Monster Hunter is a great game. I've not even touched on all of the amazing and fun things you can do, like mounting enemies or turf wars. But hopefully this review has given you a taste, and I can suggest it to just about anyone who enjoys video games. If you enjoy exploring or crafting or deep combat systems, playing online, co-op, there are just so many aspects to this game that make it perfectly suited for me personally, and I think just about anyone who enjoys video games will love Monster Hunter World, assuming they can get to grips with the combat and movement system, as I know that's not for everyone. I also played it with two friends who have played the series a lot. They, as veterans, enjoyed it. As a newcomer, I'm really into it. The only thing that kept me from getting into Monster Hunter in the past was the fact that it was primarily a portable game. I tried, but although the game itself seemed fun, I just couldn't get into it on a handheld. I'm looking forwards though to seeing what's next. But thanks so much for watching. I hope this review was useful or entertaining in some way. And if you have any questions, leave them down below and I'll get back to you ASAP. Until next time, you take care.